Let's get the view of Labour now. Here with me is the Shadow Armed Forces Minister, Luke Pollard. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us today. The Prime Minister has today called the Remembrance commemorations sacred. So is it appropriate, do you think, for people to march today? Should these marches have been banned, in your view?
Well, Remembrance is a really important day, especially when Armistice Day is so close to Remembrance Sunday as it is tomorrow. We do need to make sure that we're taking the proper precautions to protect Remembrance events in the capital, not just the cenotaph, but other Remembrance events as well. But the reason that we remember those who fell in war, the reason we remember those people who gave their life to keep our freedom and democracy is to protect British values. And one of those British values is the right to protest. It's going to be an exceedingly difficult day for policing in London, though, and we know that emotions are going to be high. And that's why it's important that, from my point of view, we back the police today. We lend them our full support to keep people safe, to challenge hate wherever they may see it, and to make sure that Remembrance events can go ahead unimpeded and unaffected by anything else that's happening in the capital.
Well, yes, and the Met Police have said that they're drafting in extra officers from around the country. They also say that they've received intelligence that large numbers of counter-protesters will be coming to London with a view to confronting those taking part in the march. So without the risk of over building up to it, how great do you think the risk is of disorder? How worried are you about that?
Well, today's going to be a really complex day for policing. Policing a large demonstration is difficult in and of itself, but when you have Remembrance events and potential clashes between people of different views here, that's why it's important that all politicians, the opposition like myself, but those in government in particular, should have been taking this week to calm tensions, to lower the temperature, rather than to hike them up, as the Home Secretary has done. You know, deliberately inflaming tensions has created the opposite effect of what we should be aiming for. It's made a more difficult day for policing, it's made a more difficult day for Remembrance, and it potentially increases the amount of hate on our streets. There's no place for anti-Semitism nor Islamophobia anywhere in our capital or across the country. And today we need to see that can be properly policed. I back the police, I back their operational independence to make the decisions on the ground to do that.
But the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister made it clear that they didn't want these marches to go ahead. Rishi Sunak has called it provocative and disrespectful to march on a weekend of Remembrance events today, Armistice Day. If there was any trouble, would they be vindicated in trying to stop it?
Well, I can't predict if there will be trouble or not. I mean, Labour backed the police when they made a request to the organisers to postpone the demonstration earlier this week. But we've got to respect the operational integrity and independence of the police to make those decisions. This week, we should have had politicians back the police, calm tensions, but also make that clear that, that the police have the authority to make an application to ban this if they have the intelligence to do so. They chose not to do that, and it's up for politicians not to second-guess that, but to back the police. And we've had a Home Secretary that hasn't done that. In fact, she's used this week to effectively launch a leadership campaign not to keep us safe on the streets and support communities that are feeling really under threat at the moment.
OK, the protesters say that they're calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The SNP have an amendment to the King's speech, which is expected to be called next week, which calls for a ceasefire. If there's a vote, will frontbenchers be forced to oppose it by the leadership?
Well, I don't know if there will be a vote or not. For those people who are calling for a ceasefire and those people who are calling for a humanitarian pause are effectively coming from a very similar place and want to get to a similar place. It's how we get to a cessation of violence that is most important. In my mind, humanitarian pauses, longer than the 4-hour short pauses that have been announced, stand the best chance of happening, to be sustained, to get the aid into Gaza. But I don't think a ceasefire will do that at the moment, because it doesn't degrade Hamas's ability to launch more attacks.
So you're backing the leadership's line about opposing a ceasefire, but will frontbenchers be whipped? Will you have to vote with the government or risk being sacked?
Well, that's a decision above my pay grade, I'm afraid. That will work out when we find out if there will be a vote, because it's not certain there will be one yet. But I think the important thing is when we look at what's happening in the debate within the country as a whole, I don't doubt that people who are calling for a ceasefire aren't doing so from good moral reasons, especially when we see the horrors on our screen. Nor do I not doubt that those people calling for humanitarian pauses are doing so for exactly the same reasons. We want to see a cessation of violence. We want to see an end to Hamas's terrorist rule in Gaza.
Okay.
And the best way of doing that, I think, is with longer pauses to make sure we can get the aid in. You can't reconstruct a hospital's water supply in only 4 hours. That's why we need longer pauses. That needs to begin immediately, and so we can get the aid in immediately as well and the hostages out.
OK, we've heard today the WHO warning that a child is killed every 10 minutes in Gaza. We've also heard the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying that too many Palestinians are being killed. What do you think it'll take for Labour to shift its position? Is there a chance it could shift to backing a ceasefire if the civilian casualty, the number of civilian casualties rises?
Well, I think too many Palestinians are being killed and too many children are being killed in particular. So getting to a cessation of hostilities where we don't have hostages held by Hamas, where we don't have Hamas in control of Gaza able to launch more 7th of October attacks as they are saying they want to do, that has to be the right way forwards. But to do that, I think a unilateral ceasefire won't happen by Israel. But a humanitarian pauses where we build support to get the aid in, build support for the space for a proper negotiation with a two-state solution that removes Hamas and makes sure we're keeping people safe. That is the right approach. It's both coming from a place of grief that we can see on both sides, but we need to make sure that whatever we propose can actually happen and is getting the aid to the people who really need it. That's humanitarian pauses, I think.
OK, Luke Pollard, Shadow Armed Forces Minister, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. Thank you.